If we are not black people, who are we? Okay, so you should be coming from part 5 of this series. These videos are a part of a docu-series and should be watched from the beginning in order if you're going to understand what is being presented. So please, if you have not watched parts 1 through 5, please stop this video and start back from video 1 and watch them consecutively for true context. Okay, well, like I've been saying through parts 1 through 5, we are not black people. But through these last 5 parts, we have not proved this. I was just laying the foundation to the answer. In the last 3 parts, we went through how the world was divided before race and skin color. And at the simplest dividing factor, we saw that the world is divided between 3 different people. The 3 sons of Noah, which are Ham, Japheth, and Shem. And we went through a lot of history about the peoples of this world. But we never actually got to where we, who are simply called black people, where do we fit into all of this? In this research, we saw that 2 out of the 3 sons of Noah have heritage that could be labeled as black people. But this is definitely not proving anything. There needs to be more understanding. And so before I simply go into stating who it is that we are, I think it is important to answer this question by doing some reverse engineering of history, basically backtracking our steps. So what I'm going to do is share some history with you that is not the mainstream history that they have taught you in the schools. And from this, it can bring more clarity on who it is that we are. So listen, first thing, I want to be clear, and I should have made this clear before. I am not only speaking to people in the United States, but like I also said in these videos, I'm not only talking to people classified as black people or darker skinned people, because not all of us share the same heritage. There are many of you in Africa that I'm talking to, yes, but your history is quite different. So in this video, I will not be reverse engineering that part of the history. For instance, I am definitely speaking to the people in the parts of Nigeria and Ghana. Not all, but definitely some of you. And I absolutely am addressing those in South Africa, including the areas of Angola and the Congo, Namibia, parts of Tanzania and Kenya. You are all there scattered within. And just because I didn't call out your country, that does not mean I'm not speaking to you. You are all there scattered within. But I cannot address your history in this because the reverse engineering of your history is a little different from you than ours with the transatlantic slave trade. I will get to your history, just not in this segment. Either way, who I am addressing right now, specifically, are you who are the descendants of family who was taken in the transatlantic slave trade. Those of you who are in the United States, the Caribbean, and also South America. This includes you Jamaicans who were later taken to England when they opened up access to you in the 60s. I'm talking to those of you of the Windrush generation. All of you are who I am talking to. Those who are descendants of the transatlantic slave trade. Again, those in Africa and in Europe and Asia, I am talking to you as well. I just am not dealing with your specific history yet. I hope that makes sense. It is all of us who are labeled black people by the world while we don't know who we descend from. In America, they call us African Americans. In the Caribbean, we just go by the island that we come from. In South America, they call you Afro-Brazilians or Afro-Venezuelans or Afro-Colombians, etc. You know, for many of us in the United States, many don't actually know that the same troubles that we have had in the United States, you all face the same struggles in your country. The world system all calls us black people, but they also label us Afro whatever, which doesn't mean very much except that they say that we are taken from Africa. All of us within these 2 continents and islands that descend from slavery all descend from the same heritage, and we are from the same people. We are not black people. Now, to prove this to you, like I said, I'm going to be doing some reverse engineering of history. So let's get to it. So this is where we will start. We are in North and South America and the islands of the Caribbean. By the way, this does include Cuba. All of us should know that our ancestors did not originate here. What I'm saying is that wherever you are is not your land, and you do not have any rights or history with this land that you live in now. But over the time, throughout our generations, the governments and the system have worked to assimilate us in. So basically, after they enslaved our ancestors and then gave some fake type of freedom that was tied to cruel oppression that they labeled about our skin color, they then tried to assimilate us. The slave trade ended at different points in time, depending on where you were, but for the most part it ended in the 19th century. Around the year 1830, but again, it's different depending on where you were. I'm speaking specifically about the slave trade. That's the gathering of slaves from Africa and bringing them to these locations, not the ending of forced free labor, just to be clear. Anyways, I'm not going to discuss slavery, but just that this is the starting point of where we are going to reverse engineer this history from. So we see these locations right here: the United States, the Caribbean, and all areas of South America. All of us that were taken to these locations came in slave ships. So what we'll do is reverse history and go backwards in time and take these slave ships back to where they came from and started from. When we do this, we get to this area right here, the slave coast in the area of Guinea. Now what I'm going to do is go back to information I introduced in part 1, but I promised that I would get to. In part 1, I mentioned the slave maps. So now in our reverse engineering of history, it's time that we can go back to them. So understand, please, that this is not an easy subject to break down. If it was, you would have heard all of this before. But I'm going to do my best to make a difficult subject easier to digest. I'm going to start here. Here are 3 maps. They are all maps from the 18th century. This one is from 1747, charted by Amon Bowen. This is a full map, and this one is more zoomed in on the area that I will focus on. Amon Bowen was a royal map maker to both King George II of Great Britain and Louis XV of France. His maps are in English, which for us, it helps greatly. Then there is this map from 1737 from Johann Matthias Hase. He was a German mathematician, astronomer, and cartographer. A cartographer means a professional who makes maps to communicate spatial information. He's a map maker. This is his map. And then we have this map from 1710 from Hermann Moll. He was a German-born English map maker known for a number of influential maps. So we have these 3 maps right here. These are 3 slave maps from the 18th century documented in Africa. One from 1747, one from 1737, and another from 1710. Now, I have placed these maps on my website for everyone to be able to have access to them and download them for yourself. If you're subscribed to my website, you should have received an email. For anyone else, the link is in the description box. These maps are an important part of understanding our history that was taken from us, so I encourage you to review them on your own. What I first want to do is highlight this region right here. This section along the coast is called Guinea. It is on all 3 maps. On Hermann Moll's map, above Guinea, he writes this: I am credibly informed that ye country about 100 leagues north of the coast of Guinea is inhabited by white men, or at least a different kind of people from the blacks, who wear clothes and have ye use of letters, made silk, and that some of them keep the Christian Sabbath. So what he's saying is that this area of Guinea is colonized land of the Europeans, and it is still to this day. It is not controlled by the African people, but by the colonizers. This area of Guinea is conquered land of Africa that was used for trade. If you notice, it's broken down by what was traded. There was the grain coast, the ivory coast, which we still know it as today. There's the gold coast, and then the slave coast. You can understand by their names what was traded in those regions. Now, there is an interesting point about the slave coast, but I will try to get back to it later. Just note that the slave coast is one point where the slaves were put into ships to send to the Americas and the Caribbean. What I'm explaining first is that this area is conquered territory. That's what I want you to get. I will not go over the history of Guinea in this video, but just know that the European colonizers began to trade and make arrangements and deals with the Hamites of Africa. They knew the difference, and they did not come to Africa for them. If you ever watch movies like The Woman King, you see that the African king made deals with the European colonizers, which they traded slaves for silk and other fine goods. This is just an accurate depiction of history. What I'm saying is that the European colonizers knew the difference of who they were looking for, and they did not come to Africa for the Hamites. I have this book called The Slave Trade by Hugh Thomas. It's a very extensive, well-documented book. On page 45, he writes this: "The racial mixture in West Africa was interesting. Before the Arab invasions, the land was principally inhabited by two peoples. In the northwest, the Hamites, called Libyans or Barbary by the Romans, or Berbers by the Arabs, a word actually deriving from Barbary, and black people to the south of the desert. All the same, the Berbers retained most of their individual characteristics. As highland tillers of the soil and lovers of freedom, they were rarely moved by religious enthusiasm and were able, on the whole, to preserve their purity of race. But in the south, there was much mixture. Thus, the people of Timbuktu had black skin, but much Berber blood. They thought of the black Songhai in the middle Niger Valley as savages." Remember that point. I highlight this excerpt to show that this information goes back to what I presented in parts 3 through 5. Understand, the world was not originally separated by skin color, but by tribes, and this was how the world was viewed. The Hamites had known regions. They were known in the northwest and the east. They were known as Libyans. These were the sons of Put. Then in the northeast, we already know Mizraim in Egypt. And then south, we have the people of Cush in Ethiopia. This land was all accounted for. This was the land given to them. If you look at these slave maps, it confirms this. But this land west, that's south of the Sahara, was land that was originally for Canaan. But Canaan did not take his land, but he occupied Israel's. And therefore, as they warned him, his people were displaced. Now, you see that upper part of Africa, it shows the Barbary, the barbarians as the Greeks called them. Then you see Ethiopia. You see, the slavers, they knew the difference in the people and the lands that they occupied. These were their slave maps. But there was a territory that they knew of, and this is what we will focus on now. If you remember in part 1, I said I would much rather be called a Negro. I said that because with just a little research, we are able to go back and gain understanding of who we are. In these slave maps, there is a part of these maps that validate this statement. It's this land right here. It's called Negro land. They took the Negroes from Negro land. This land right here. It is in West Africa in the sub-Saharan region. So as we reverse engineer history, let's understand it clearly. We started here in the Americas and the Caribbean. And then going backwards, we head to Guinea, where the slaves were put on ships at the Slave Coast, which was right here. Now, if we keep going backwards in time, understanding these maps, the slaves, they were not taken from Guinea. This was the place of trade. This is where the Europeans set up their shop. This was their area. They noted it in their maps. So with that understanding, where do you think they got their Negro slaves from? Yeah, Negro land. The place of the people they call black people. Negro means black. This is where they got their black people. So, as we have reversed history, we are now in this area of Negro land that inhabited the people that were taken as slaves. Now, here's the interesting point of history, and this will show you how ineffective our education system really is. This land is not actually called Negro land. This is what the European slavers called it, but that's not actual history. This place and area does have a name, and it was known. It's just that the European slavers did not care. And if it were taught in our schools, it would be able to help answer questions instead of leaving us in the dark. Don't think that your schools and all this education didn't know. They just didn't tell us. And that part is personal to me because I graduated from an HBCU, Hampton University to be exact. And though I do brag and do believe that it is the best of all the HBCUs, I would not send my child there. It did not teach a thing about any of this. If we went to schools that were actually created for us, and they don't even teach us this history, it is clear that our education was not meant to liberate us with knowledge, but to enslave us more with indoctrination. But that's another point for another day. My point is that you will not find this history taught in schools, and it absolutely should be, at least showing us the European slave maps. The next part of history I'm about to go into brings about a great deal of answers. So let's take this area of what they call Negro land and see what it was before the colonizers rounded up their slaves from it. Now please note, I do go into greater detail of this information in my video series about understanding Israel if you ever want to do a deeper dive into this with all my sources. But in making this as simple as possible, I'm only hovering over this information. Just so you know, if you want to watch the video, the link is in the description box. Anyways, this area that was called Negro land, it's called the Sunai Empire. The Sunai people themselves were farmers, fishermen, hunters, craftsmen, traders, and warriors. They were a confederation of people who came to dominate the middle Niger around the region of Dendi. This area right here is the area of the Sunai Empire before it was taken down. The territory of the land that the slavers labeled Negro land was the territory and land of the Sunai Empire. Write it down, Sunai Empire. The Sunai Empire was an empire that dominated the Western Sudan in the 15th and 16th century. It replaced Mali as the most important empire in West Africa. This was after the time of the decline of Mansa Musa's empire of Mali in the year 1350 AD. The Sunai Empire began with Sunai Ali I. So let's get a quick summary here. Let's understand one thing very clearly from this point right now. The people that were taken in the transatlantic slave trade, you are not black people. At the most basic level, you are Negroes that were taken from what the slavers labeled Negro land. But this land was actually the Sunai Empire. So right now, you can say you are from the Sunai people. So you do have an identity, and it's not just black people. But we will go further. So when you review this people of the Sunai, the Hamites of Africa, they absolutely rejected this people. They called them savages, as I just read from that quote earlier from Hugh Thomas's book, The Slave Trade. So you know how they say that our own people sold us into slavery? That is not true. That is only looking at it from a perspective of skin color. It is actually the case that Hamites, who did not like the people of Sunai, who believed that they were savages and they were different people than they worked with the Europeans and sold us into slavery. It is actually the case that the Europeans made agreements with the Hamites to infiltrate the Sunai people. Sunai Ali Burr, leader of the Sunai people, realized the importance of the Niger River for commerce and military operations. Like the Mali Empire before him, he divided his empire into provinces and placed each under the control of a governor. This was in the late 15th century. During this time, the people of Sunai were beginning to meet new visitors. People like Prince Henry the Navigator. He sent Portuguese ships and sailors down the west coast of Africa, establishing a number of coastal trading points. I mean, write these names down yourself so you can study them on your own. Prince Henry the Navigator and Sunai Ali. Okay, so understand that these European explorers, they tried to get the Sunai people before they even used the Hamites. European explorers and traders seeking to get into the Sudan from the coastal regions found their way barred by rainforest and the mighty Sunai armed forces. There were raids to get slaves from the Sunai Empire. They were repulsed time and again during this early period of the Sunai rule. So this obviously brought about distrust from the Sunai people against all Europeans. The Europeans could not crack their defenses through the 15th and 16th centuries. They were attacked by Hamite converts to Islam, and by the end of the 16th century, they lost their control and were overtaken, and the people en masse were taken down the slave coast in chains on their way to the Americas. So let's keep going with this reversal of history, because the Sunai Empire is an empire of the semi-modern world that took place during the periods of the Renaissance. But there is much more to this history. In order to explain this, I'm going to target and pinpoint one specific area. This area right here. This area or settlement called Kukya, also known as Gao, please forgive me if I'm not pronouncing it correctly. This place is highly important to understand. This was the first large settlement of the Sunai people. This place was situated in the Dendi country and known as Dendina, lying near the Niger River on the northwestern border of what is now the modern state of Nigeria. And so if we reverse engineer history with this point of Kukya as our point of reference, we can begin to gain more clarity of who the Songhai people were. Again, Kukya is also known as Gao. It is the same place. So if you remember, I said that the Sunai Empire came after the Empire of Mali. Okay, so we will continue back through time to this people of Mali. The Empire of Mali started around the early 13th century. I think it's the year 1226 to its decline in the 15th century when the Songhai took over. Just keeping it simple, this area of Gao was taken by Mansa Musa. Mansa Musa was a powerful king of the Mali Empire. He extended the Mali Empire from east to west. In 1326 AD, he made a pilgrimage to Mecca, the holy city of the Mohammedans. He was a Muslim. On his pilgrimage, his general of Mali took control of Gao. Now, it is important to understand this because the same people that they conquered to take down this town of Gao were the same people that later reclaimed it and formed the Songhai Empire. I hope I'm not losing you, so just follow me. I'm just moving down through time, starting from the Songhai Empire down to the Empire of Mali. We descend from those people of the Songhai, those who took back our land from the Mali Empire. But when Mali took over, who did they take the land from? This is where we begin to receive clarity of who we are. But before we get into it, let's just summarize where we are in this reversal of history. Remember, we started at the transatlantic slave trade. Now, going back in time, before the slave trade, the people that were taken came from the Songhai Empire, which the slavers labeled Negro land. The Songhai Empire became dominant in the 15th century after the fall of the Mali Empire. The people of Songhai took back their land from the Mali Empire. The Mali Empire was before the Songhai Empire and started in the 13th century. What we want to learn is who were the people that the Mali Empire conquered when taking the land of Gao. Who was there before the people of Mali took it as their territory? That's where we're going right now in this reversal of history. So what we're going to understand right now is who the people were who Mali conquered. I want to make sure that's clear. When Mansa Musa returned from his pilgrimage to Arabia by way of Gao, he accepted the surrender from the king of Ghana and his nobles. Among these prisoners were Ali Kolon, or Kolun, and his brother Selmar Nar, the sons of Za Yasebi. So here's the answer of who controlled the land before Mansa Musa. Those who controlled the settlement of Gao before Mansa Musa took control were those of the Za dynasty. Write it down, Za dynasty. And it was this same people from that Za dynasty that Soni Ali, the one who started the Songhai Empire, it is this same people that they descend from. So if you're following, those in the transatlantic slave trade descend from the Songhai Empire, who are just descendants of the Za dynasty who later reclaimed their land back from Mali. The Songhai Empire is often referred to as the Za Soni dynasty after Soni Ali. So, who are the people of the Za dynasty? And this is where it gets really interesting. This right here takes us back many centuries to the 4th century AD. This man that I'm illustrating is Za el-Yemeni. He came to Kukya, what we also call Gao. He came around 300 AD, around that time. He established a line of kings known as the Za, or Dia dynasty. The Za dynasty. He was the founder of the first Sudanic dynasty in Western Africa. This man was a Yahudim, the actual Hebrew word for Jew. Za el-Yemeni was a Hebrew. His name is sometimes written as Za al-Ayaman. Za el-Yemeni came to the Niger country by way of Rogla in central Algeria today, written like this, Orgla. Orgla was a great trading center of the Yahudim. In Dr. Alan Godbee's book, The Lost Tribes, A Myth, in his book, he writes, the founder of the first Yahudim dynasty established his capital later at Gao, on the eastern upper Niger River. Nahum Schloutz, author of Travels in North Africa, he writes, the Arabs, Moors, and the Sudanic writers attribute to the ancient black African Hebrews the establishment of the first empires. says the erection of the first public buildings in the country, the construction of the first canals and irrigation systems, and the institution of a social economic regime which still survives in all Saharan communities. So let me go over something. After the fall of Jerusalem, the Hebrews migrated and scattered all around the world. We know of their history in Europe, which I will tie in later. We know about their travels throughout Asia, but they also scattered in Africa and established themselves outside of the land of Cush, Mizraim, and Put. All of this area right here was not their land. They had no rights to it. This land of Canaan, that Canaan forfeited, this land of West Africa, they migrated into. The Yahudim came into the Western Sudan from northern and eastern Africa as a result of a series of migrations due to persecution. Please note that the word Yahudim is the actual word for Jew. These Yahudim migrated. They adopted new methods from other people and left their material, educational, and moral imprint among the people with whom they resided. For instance, as an example, in America, we, who they call black people, even in an oppressed land, though we have adopted many of their methods, we still have an imprint on their culture, and that's from a people who had no identity. These people who were migrating knew who they were. For many centuries, these Hebrews had to use great physical and psychological initiative. They could not afford to be complacent or show no concern about their surroundings and where they were. They were hated, so if they got too comfortable or complacent, that could mean cultural stagnation or death. The Yahudim imported into the western part of Africa a superior material, educational, and moral culture soon after 300 AD. And this cultural advancement was not duplicated or exceeded until the ascendancy of the Mohammedan leader Mansa Kanka Musa of Mali in 1312 AD. The Yahudim had an advantage over the African tribes. They carried their culture, their history, their laws, and written records with them. This assured them a constant precedent for the development of a higher social organization. Because of the stability of their Hebrew culture, the Yahudim were not absorbed into the indigenous population. They had rules, they had laws, they had a Torah. They made use of every opportunity. They were an industrious and skillful people. From the Yahudim Ghanaian states were found kings, princes, governors, generals, secretaries, treasurers, revenue agents, judges, architects, engineers, doctors, historians, etc. They set up shop there. And when they migrated, we know they formed the Za dynasty. In his book, on his map on page 256, Professor Godby says that 22 Hebrew kings reigned in Ghana before the Hegira in 622 AD, and 44 had reigned by 790. It is said that all the kings of Ghana were called by the title Kayamaga, which is said to mean King of Gold. Kumbi was the ancient capital of Ghana. It was located in the southern part of the present country of Mali. During the Middle Ages, understand, the name Ghana was not used to designate this country that we know today. Ghana was just the title of its kings. Ghana means strong warrior king, and was the title accorded to the kings of the medieval Ghana Empire in West Africa. This empire was a Hebrew empire, the Hebrew Empire of Ghana kings. The foundation of the Ghanaian Empire was based on the affluence of gold and iron. The use of iron in Africa, especially Ghana, revolutionized the social and military systems. Ghanaians fought many wars against their neighbors who did not use iron, but fought with bars of ebony. The Ghanaians could destroy their enemies because they fought with lances and swords. The king's revenue agents levied taxes on imports and exports, and the medium of exchange was gold. This was the Za dynasty, and it held sway in West Africa for over 1,000 years. Understand, all the kings of Ghana professed the Hebrew religion. But in the year 1009, a radical transformation occurred. Za Kasi accepted Islam. In his book, Africa, History of a Continent, when concerning Islam, Basil Davidson makes the point. Islam reached the markets of the Western Sudan by at least the 9th century, but it makes little initial impact. The rulers of Ghana do not accept Islam as one of their state religions. Only at the beginning of the 11th century are there a few such conversions. the earliest of any importance of which we know being that of the king of Gal, traditionally in 1010, followed by that of the king of Kanem-Bornu in 1086. Davidson says, these are tactical conversions. These kings are Muslims only in name, motivated as much the commercial convenience as by appreciation of the political and religious achievements and teaching of Islam. And so after this conversion, this later led to them falling to the Empire of Mali in the 13th century. There's too much history to go over to explain all this. I'm talking about 1700 years of history condensed into a 30-minute video. This is not meant to be comprehensive. Again, I do give more details in this video if you ever wanted to get more details. The link is in the description box. This is not a comprehensive history lesson, but it's just a reverse engineering of history that is meant to do one thing, and that's to explain who you are. If you are a descendant from the transatlantic slave trade, you are more than likely a descendant from the Sunai Empire. The Sunai Empire are descendants of the Za dynasty. The Za dynasty is an empire of Hebrews who were led by Hebrew kings that controlled Western Africa in the Sudan region for 10 centuries before being converted to Islam and conquered by the Empire of Mali. The descendants of the transatlantic slave trade are descendants of the Hebrew kingdom of the Za dynasty that descend from the house of Israel and the house of Judah from the line of Shem. This is who you are. If you are a descendant from the transatlantic slave trade, you are a descendant of the house of Israel and Judah. You are an Israelite. This is your history, and no one can take this from you now. Before I conclude this part, let me give you one more piece of history that can help confirm what I am saying to you. We're going to talk about Eldad the Danite, or also called Eldad Hadani. In the 9th century, this black African Hebrew arrived in the city of Karanan in Algeria. He told a credible story of a Hebrew empire south of the Sahara in the western Sudan. According to Eldad, the Hebrews in the interior of Africa spoke a Phoenician Hebraic language mixed with Arabic. They had a religion which had come down from Moses. Eldad said that the people of his tribe had fled from the kingdom of Yasharel after Sennacherib the Assyrian had subdued it, and that other Israelite tribes such as Naphtali, Gad, and Asher were in the land from which he came. He told of the law of Moses which they followed, the complete series of the scriptures except Esther and Lamentations. Eldad displayed as evidence some ceremony pertaining to the slaughtering of animals for food. It was written in Hebrew with an Arabic tint, but Eldad claimed that he knew no other language than Hebrew. In regard to Eldad's story, the Gaon, head of the Yahudim, assured the people that the story was credible. Solomon Grazel writes of Eldad in his book on page 279 in his book, History of the Jews. Understand, this is not hidden from record, it's just not known in the mainstream. His name is Eldad the Danite, or Eldad Hadani. Look him up, and then attach what else I have shared here. What I have tried to do in around 30 minutes is reverse engineer history from the transatlantic slave trade to the history of the people that those taken in the transatlantic slave trade descend from. You are not a black person. You are not a person without history. You have a great history and you have a great future. But this is only true if you live in the truth. So like I used with the analogy of Samson's hair, the enemy has made sure that you never regrow your hair, and he keeps you tied to him so that you are able to be easily controlled. But if you wake up and live in the truth and be who you're supposed to be, you will no longer be cursed, but you will be blessed. But oh yeah, here's the hardest thing to hear. You actually are cursed. You know, many of us, personally, we have had to deal with this. We have to think and understand, why do people hate us so much? Why were our people so oppressed? And why is it that no matter what we do, we cannot come together and achieve anything outside of what our oppressor has allowed? Why is this able to be? And the reason is that we are cursed. And that goes back into who you truly are. What I have done is gone deep into who we are. You are not a black person. You are a descendant from the house of Israel and Judah. And your heritage has been stripped from you, and is not just the fault of our oppressors, but more so the fault of our ancestors. So now that you know the truth of who you are, you need to understand what happened and why we were cursed. Why was this allowed to happen? Let me let you know that the reason I am able to make this video right now is because I am not cursed. I am in the blessing stage, and it is a great place to be, and I desire all to be there as well. But this cannot and will not happen without the acceptance of truth and living through it. But I don't want to go too fast. Let me help break this down for you so it can make sense. Psalm chapter 25 verse 5 prays to Yah and says, "Lead me in your truth and teach me, for you are the Elohim of my salvation. For you I wait all the day long." Psalm chapter 145 verse 18 says, "Yahuwah is near to all who call on him, to all who call on him in truth." You see, the thing is that the devil has been indoctrinating people in so many lies that though they believe in Yah, they still reject him because they have parts of their heart that are unclean and impure. And because of this impurity, they cannot call on him in truth. I loved Yah before I knew this truth. I love him the same now that I know. But it's just that I understand him more. The world makes more sense, and I don't have to twist things or run from hard questions because I'm trying to fit these false philosophies of men in with my belief. I don't have to run away from the truths about Christianity because I'm trying to fit in with some label. I just live in his truths. It's the truth that truly sets us free. And who we are is a big part of this truth, especially in these end times. And most people will be judged because it is something that they cannot accept because of their thoughts and ideals about race and the hatred in their heart. You, please, do not let that be you. So we will stop the discussion at this time and pick it back up in the next episode where we get to understand why all of this was able to happen. Understand, right now, many of you watching are the dry bones, and it's time that you are awakened. And this series is trying to do just that. So now that you understand who you are a descendant from the house of Israel and Judah. Now that you understand this, please continue on to the next part and allow me to explain to you why our people have been cursed and why it was kept from you. I hope by now that you have made it this far in this series, it has at least got you thinking. Right now, many of you are the dry bones. And as Ezekiel 37 verse 11 says, you may believe your hope is lost and you yourselves are cut off. But I am here to show you the complete opposite is true. Your hope is not lost and you yourselves are not cut off if you just awaken and be who you truly are. So I will show you. Click on the link to the next video and let's talk about it some more. Be blessed. Hallelujah. Praise Yah. Okay, thanks again for watching. If this has blessed you, please like this and share this video with your family and your friends. Again, this is not just a video to share, but to watch together with your family and friends and start the conversation. It's intended to start conversations that many of you all can lead personally. So please use this and help your family and friends that allow you to. This is part 6 of the series. Click this link or just move on to the next video in the playlist. As always, I want to thank all of you who donate and contribute to this ministry. This series would not be possible without your support. I thank you sincerely. Be blessed. Okay, thanks again everyone for watching. See you in part 7. I love you all.